right. Well, I'll go ahead and introduce myself, and then Dan and I put together a few slides just kind of generally about Trout Unlimited, a little bit more about our careers and how we got here, and then what sort of opportunities and pathways might exist. And so as Maggie mentioned, my name is Jeff Elliott. I work with Colorado Trout Unlimited as the Youth Education Coordinator, and I'm based out of Glen Haven, Colorado, so up in Larimer County, just outside of Estes Park.
And yeah, before Jeff brings up that slide deck, my name is Dan Omasta. I'm the grassroots coordinator for Colorado Trout Unlimited, based here in Buena Vista. And I focus mainly on kind of watershed planning, some native trout stuff, and really supporting community collaboration around water use and healthy rivers and streams, and agriculture is a big part of that. So I'm excited to dive into that a little more.
All right. Are y'all seeing the slides? Perfect. So yeah, as I mentioned, I just wanted to provide a few slides to everyone, just to kind of go over who we are at Trout Unlimited and here in Colorado at CTU, and then kind of carry the discussion from there. So just to kind of start out at the big picture level. So here at Colorado Trout Unlimited, our mission is to conserve, protect, and restore Colorado's cold water fisheries and their watersheds. And we do this under our parent organization, Trout Unlimited, which is nationally, or is nationwide. So here as a grassroots arm in Colorado, we focus on cooperation, collaboration, advocacy, and education to promote conservation. And so Dan was just kind of mentioned that. I think what come to mind for me is those two words, cooperation and collaboration. Everything we do is with other people. We're never operating as an island or isolated. So we're working with all sorts of different stakeholders, whether those be water providers, water users, recreationists, other nonprofits, state and local governments to help pursue our mission. And as a science-based organization, we focus a lot on not just educating the public and doing public education for communities, for young people, but also educating our lawmakers and legislators on the impacts and benefits of different legislation. And so as we kind of look towards our future, the vision that we hope to foster is one that will ensure robust populations of native and wild cold water fish. So here in Colorado, that's trout is our primary focus, within their original range, in hopes that future generations, our children or children's children, can enjoy healthy fisheries and healthy home waters. So a little bit about kind of how we operate as an organization. So as I mentioned, here at Colorado Trout Unlimited, we're the state council. So we're sort of that grassroots state arm of Trout Unlimited, which is nationwide. Here in Colorado, we have 44 board of directors. So we're volunteer-led as a nonprofit by our board of directors that help oversee what we do at Colorado Trout Unlimited. That board of directors includes 24 local chapter leaders. And so across the state of Colorado, in different communities, we have local grassroots volunteer-led chapters that help connect Trout Unlimited with on-the-ground projects and help implement those in their areas. And so, for example, in Colorado Springs, we have the Pikes Peak chapter of Trout Unlimited. There's several other ones kind of up and down the Front Range communities, as well as chapters focusing in different communities along different watersheds on the western slope. Altogether, across the state of Colorado, we have over 12,000 members. I think this might actually be a little bit of a dated number, so it's likely even higher than this at this point. But those members help support our mission through the dues that they pay, but then they're also connected with their grassroots chapter to help serve as volunteers on projects and programs that those chapters in Colorado Trout Unlimited host. So overall, we have more than 44,000 volunteer hours that help support the work that we're doing. And so there's only 5 of us that are full-time staff with Colorado Trout Unlimited. So we rely really heavily and leverage the power of those volunteers and the passion that they have to get these projects, the different projects that we do, done in their communities. As Maggie mentioned, that's a way that she first connected with us, was as a volunteer. And we'll talk a little bit about how that's a great kind of entry point into the conservation world. And National Trout Unlimited, so National TU, has staff all over the country. And we're really fortunate here in Colorado to have a number of those staff based in the area, focusing on specific sort of nationally funded projects here in Colorado, whether those are sort of river basin specific, or they're just TU staff that happen to love Colorado and this is where they choose to live. All right, Dan, I'll turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jeff. So yeah, we'll run through these quickly and then kind of, I think, have a more robust conversation, as a group. But really, we working with our volunteers and our staff, there's kind of four main components to our mission. So there's the protection of high quality habitat for native trout, cold water species. And that's, really, really important. It takes a lot of money and a lot of time to restore watersheds or fish populations. And so the more we can invest in protecting them, it's a really great return on investment. You can also get, a lot more done, by keeping an area and the ecosystem within that watershed functioning properly. You don't have to spend as much time or brain damage going in and trying to restore it. So protection is a key part of what we do. And then reconnecting. So, fragmented fish populations and habitats, dewatered areas, those are pretty common around Colorado, whether it's, culverts under roads for flood control, or whether it's dewatering a stream from certain agricultural diversions, pulling water out of streams during low flows. So working with agricultural producers or municipalities to update their infrastructure in ways that fish can move through there at certain times of the year. And what that also does too is, we see fish really as an indicator species. We're Trout Unlimited, but really we look at the watershed as a whole. And so when we're reconnecting, a high mountain stream, for example, to the main stem, we're not just allowing fish to connect and move through there, but we're also allowing all of the important nutrients and sediments and environmental inputs that are important to a healthy, larger watershed to be moving more freely through the system. And that makes for some important downstream effects as well. And then restoring watersheds, obviously, as Jeff mentioned, working collaboratively with a lot of different organizations, landowners, elected officials, other nonprofits to preserve and improve the quality of our habitats. So those can be restoring sections of stream just for, our sport fish, creating good habitat, those kinds of things, but also restoring important headwaters systems. And then sustaining, through our efforts with volunteers, through fundraising, engaging youth and college students and the people who are going to come up behind us and really make a difference in the world and for our watersheds is really important, because if we don't focus on the future and bringing more and more people in, then the efforts today might not carry through. So that sustaining is really important. And then I think next slide. All right, so our priority projects, the way that we work in Colorado, it's a lot of different elements. So we work a lot with, the Colorado Water Plan. I'm not sure if you've covered that in any of your classes, but that was passed in 2015. And it's a way to really bring all the different water users in Colorado together around a shared set of values. And they were created in each separate basin in Colorado, and look at everything from agriculture to municipal use, to recreation, to the environment, and what those different user groups need, what challenges they face, and how we can work together to find the best strategies to move forward. So that's TU is heavily engaged around that in the state. That's a big part of the work I do. Always happy to talk more about that. We also do a lot of work around native trout recovery. So in Colorado, there were 5 species of native trout that were once endemic to our streams before human impacts came forward. So we've got the greenback cutthroat, which is for the South Platte Basin. It's also, there's a population up in Bear Creek, right there in your backyard. They thought that those fish were extinct up until 2012. And they found one remaining population there in Bear Creek. And so since that time, we've worked with our land management agencies to kind of grow those fish out and restore habitat across the Front Range, and to start stocking those greenbacks into waterways. And then there's other native trout kind of throughout Colorado that we do similar work with. And then there's conservation advocacy. This is a big part of what we do. So this gets to a lot of the protection. So working with legislators to identify key wilderness areas, or important wild or cold water streams that need certain protections from the state in order to thrive. We also do a lot of work around public lands and access, making sure that everyone has access to their public lands, and that with this increase in recreation that we're seeing, that we protect and invest in maintaining those public lands for future generations. And then youth education, Jeff can certainly speak to this more. This is what he does day to day. But youth education is really important for that sustain element. As I've mentioned, it's also trout and our watersheds are really great learning laboratories. So getting youth out onto the water to learn is really, really important. And we've got some great programs like Trout in the Classroom, where kids are raising trout from eggs all the way to fry, and learning all about water quality and evolution and species development, and a lot of STEM related aspects to that. There's also other programs like Stream Girls, which works with the Girl Scouts to get troops outside, and then kind of learning in the field. And then there's things like Stream Explorers. We have college level camps or college clubs, and then also we have an annual youth camp held in Gunnison, where we get high schoolers from all over the state coming together for a week to camp out and learn about conservation, learn about fishing, and really build those relationships that they'll have for a long time. And then chapter engagement is critical to what we do. As Jeff mentioned, we have 24 chapters around the state. Those are all volunteer driven. And so they work on those local issues, whether it's advocacy or restoring habitat or putting on events or helping fundraise for important projects. Those chapters are really the lifeblood of TU, and we rely on them pretty heavily to get important work done in Colorado.
All right. Thanks, Dan. And as we kind of transition away from talking about Trout Unlimited, kind of at the high level and what we do here in Colorado, Colorado TU, Dan and I wanted to provide just a little bit more background on kind of the specific work that we focus on, and then a little bit about our trajectory. How did we get to where we are now, to try and provide some context and maybe some clues into good sort of next steps for you all. So as the youth education coordinator with CTU, my primary role is focused around youth programs. And so our youth programs here at Colorado Trout Unlimited are structured in a way that we have different opportunities for folks to engage with us at different parts in their sort of scholastic career. And so all the way down through elementary school, as Dan mentioned, we have Trout in the Classroom, an in-school curriculum-based program for kids to participate in right alongside their classroom teachers. Our programs of Stream Girls and Stream Kids and Stream Explorers, these STEM-based or extracurricular opportunities are focused around that middle school audience. And then as people get into high school, we have our summer youth camp to engage those folks. And then onward up into college, the Five Rivers College Clubs that operate throughout the state. So trying to create this continuum of programming, and we call it the stream of engagement. I'm sort of playing on that, our water focus in that name. And so kind of the other parts of my job that go alongside with managing all those programs are supporting kind of how we develop the funds and how we ensure that we have appropriate support to ensure all those programs can happen, as well as working with partners. So building a network of partners, both among our local chapters, other conservation organizations that might help support environmental education centers, and then other, potential funders or corporate sponsors that might be able to be involved. So all aspects of those programs, not just delivering, but how do we support them and make sure that, money's not a barrier, money or gear is not a barrier for folks to participate in those things. And so how I got to kind of where I am now, I took a pretty non-traditional approach, I think, to getting into a conservation world. So my bachelor's degree is from University of Montana in English literature and philosophy. So when I was deciding what I wanted to go to college for, I was really passionate about education and engaging kind of the next generation in, and learning. And I thought English lit or philosophy was going to be the way that I could pursue that. But as I was in, I think it was my 5th year of undergrad or so, I started volunteering with a natural history center in Montana, up in Missoula, and really fell in love with working with younger audiences in the outdoors, teaching them about nature and engaging them in outdoor recreation. And so that brought me here to Colorado, where I worked for an organization called Rocky Mountain Conservancy for several years, where I started out as an intern leading youth education programs in Rocky Mountain National Park, and then was able to transition into staff roles where I focused a little bit more on service learning opportunities with young adults. While I was with the Conservancy, I kind of really ironed out that this is where I wanted to go with my career. And so I pursued a master's through Colorado State University in conservation leadership. And then was excited this past year to transition to Colorado Trout Unlimited over the summer, kind of combining my career passions for, working with younger audiences in the outdoors and engaging them in conservation work, as well as, I've been fly fishing since I was 5 or 6 years old. I've been a TU member for decades now. And so it's great to kind of combine those two things for me. But I think, the biggest takeaway from my trajectory was, take the opportunities to volunteer, get out and get your hands dirty and engage in things that you might be interested in, to see if it's really for you. Because I know that was those volunteer experiences I had in Montana were really shaped my future from there.
Thanks, Jeff. So yeah, I guess, to dive in a little more to what I do, I work with a lot of coalitions, specifically around kind of watershed planning and restoration projects on the ground. Just as an example, right now I'm working with the Upper Gunnison, for example, to do forest health planning and also rec planning as part of their stream management plan. And so really being able to work with broad coalitions of stakeholders, whether it's the Forest Service or ranchers, irrigators, outfitters, those kinds of groups to really help identify, the challenges that they're facing, what their concerns are around a very limited water supply, and what we can do as a community to really, protect areas or enhance the function of our watersheds to protect these different uses, and where there's good overlap. I think a lot of the time we see very different spectrums and stakeholders, and there's a lot of competition and controversy. And obviously we live in a very polarized political climate right now. But the nice thing about working for TU and really in watershed conservation is that people have a lot of similarities, more than we realize. And so it's always really inspiring to work with these different coalitions and have people coming together around a common set of values, and really working together to protect the resiliency of our watersheds. And then, as Jeff mentioned, similarly help a lot with fundraising and grant writing, organizational development. I help our 24 different chapters around the state to help run their organizations. So providing kind of the leadership guidance of how they can recruit new volunteers or put on events or identify new leaders in their organization and provide them with the skills and experience they need to be successful. And then a lot of, project management, both for individual restoration work as well as kind of grants and oversight. And very similar to Jeff, I kind of took a very circuitous route to being here. And so, I went to school at the University of Colorado in Boulder for political science and environmental studies. Out of school, I worked on some farms and ranches. I was also a seasonal biological technician for a couple years in both the Black Canyon of the Gunnison as well as Boulder County open space. Moved to Crested Butte in the Gunnison area, spent several years up there, again, working on ranches as well as for Crested Butte Mountain Resort, doing different things up there on the mountain, and then became a raft guide and an outfitter for several years. So, I guided in the Upper Gunnison as well as in New Zealand, and then kind of that experience in New Zealand, we worked for my wife and I worked for an outfitter that brought scientists into remote areas in New Zealand to study and protect this blue duck species. And so it was such an amazing opportunity to see how you could merge kind of recreation and access through rafts into very remote areas to protect critical wildlife. And so we brought that concept back to the States and we created our own nonprofit river outfitter business, where we took both youth as well as conservation professionals down Western rivers and did a lot of monitoring of invasive and rare species in these remote desert river canyons. Did a lot of conservation work to protect some of our key resources in those areas. And so then, that kind of out of that, I joined TU in 2017 to help support kind of grassroots efforts and project management. And then just recently finished a Colorado Water Leader certification in 2020. So it's really, for me, I wasn't exactly sure where I wanted to go. I knew I wanted to work outside. I knew I wanted to do something good for the world and for the environment. Wasn't quite sure where that would go. And so I think, a lot of jumping around to different experiences, whether it's working with ranchers or on ranches, working for, as a biotech for different government agencies, working as an outfitter, seeing those different lenses of how water works in the system has really kind of provided some good background for what I do now, which is bringing different groups together and helping them see different sides of an issue and trying to find common solutions. And so I certainly did not plan to go this career route, but I think following my passions and interests at the time really kind of set me up to bring a diversity of experience to the conservation landscape.
Oh, there we go. Sorry. So as we kind of wrap up the formal part of our presentation, I wanted to just share some of these different resources, some of which I'm sure y'all are familiar with, and then some that are a little bit more specific as kind of gateways into this world. I think as both Dan and my own path to where we are now show that it's good to be open and maybe focus on the big picture of what you want to do. Like for me, it was I wanted to engage young people in learning, and that's how I ended up in the conservation world. For Dan, it was wanting to be outside and make a difference in that kind of natural world and work in the outdoors. That's where how he got to where he is now. And so I think all of these resources, as well as certainly plenty of others, can connect you with opportunities that are that first link. And so whether it's an opportunity with Trout Unlimited, through our own job and internship board, more general job boards like Conservation Job Board, or Colorado Open Space Alliance, which has a lot of local municipal government jobs posted on it, as well as those internships or sort of entryway opportunities, places like AmeriCorps, or I used to work in the Conservation Corps world, so the Corps network, where you get service experience and public lands and through great nonprofit organizations. And then here in Colorado, the Colorado Alliance for Environmental Education is another great resource. And so wanted to be sure to kind of list these and have them on a slide for y'all to, go and chase down after our call today. But I think the biggest takeaway that I would want to give anyone who's kind of at this stage is don't be afraid to volunteer. Don't be afraid to accept an internship. Dip your toe in the water and gain that experience to see where the next step might be. And from here, I think we're just ready to kind of open up for discussion and questions for the group.
Yeah, and I guess, Jeff, to add, really quick, I think that, I can remember kind of graduating college and being like, oh my gosh, what's next? What am I going to do? What's my career path? And really it's, you've got a lot of time to figure that out. I think there's people I work with who are, have been doing this for decades, who are also still trying to figure it out. So, I think it's really following your passions and, as Jeff said, dipping your toe in the water. If you're interested in something, finding an organization that works in that field and doing some volunteer work. And, it's amazing the connections and networks that you can generate from that. And people, the water community and the environmental community is pretty small. And so it's really an opportunity if you do find your passion in a certain field or a certain activity. It's, people do have those connections that they can introduce you to other opportunities to further your interests. So I just want to flag that. And I also want to flag, this concept of kind of imposter syndrome. I think a lot of the time we are worried about, do we know enough to be successful in this field? Like, do we, and do I need 10 more years of experience in order to know what I'm talking about? And really, I think we just have to get over that. I deal with that still, talking with, sitting at these meetings with people who have PhDs in fire ecology. There's at no time am I going to ever know as much as they do, but feeling comfortable with, asking those questions and relying on people who are experts in areas that we are not, is a really good skill to have, and being kind of self-aware of what you are good at and what what you bring to the table, because I'm sure all these people, all of you on the call today, bring some really important skills to the table that all of us don't have. And so finding your niche and where you can excel is really important. And yeah, I just wanted to kind of throw that out there.
Thank you guys. Firstly, I want to say a couple things. I think that my path is just as circuitous as yours. And that is just the nature of conservation work. I worked first out of grad school with a master's in biology for the Friends of the Dillon Ranger District. And that really showed me what the power of volunteerism and nonprofits was. And I was a restoration ecologist, and to get boots on the ground in the mountains, you need to use volunteers. And that's how I kept in running into TU. And when you were talking, I remembered that this is one of my most cherished possessions. This I got at the Leadville Fish Hatchery on the 50th anniversary of the Wilderness Act. We had an event there. It was, that day and many other days, I kept running into this guy, Jake Lemon, who has been working for TU for a long time. And it's I keep meeting people like you, Dan and Jeff, who have this story, where it's this rich story where you follow your heart. And that's so important because I'm 41, and at this point in my life, if I had been doing something that really didn't drive my heart forward, it would be really hard to keep working and split my time with my children because they take up so much of my life. And so in making your passions intersect with your work makes it so that your passions are sustainable and family and the things of life, like mortgages and school loans and stuff, don't wear you down. And in COVID times, these are so important. And I just love the pitch of your talk and everything. That was so great. And I wanted to say to you, Dan, I have a PhD, but that was completely inspired by volunteering, because I wrote my dissertation about how to train citizen scientists to collect reliable data. And so I'm right there with you. Monitoring is basically what I do, revegetation monitoring. And you're talking about doing that along rivers, and those are the things you create. There's no job on a job board for that. You go into the entry point, like you said, and then you become a creator of things. And so in Summit County, working for the Friends group, people thought children couldn't do service work, and so when I moved to Salida, I was no, they can. And then I talked to GARNA, the Greater Arkansas River Nature Association, and we had a BLM grant. But partnering with TU made this whole ecology program, which still lives on in my absence, which is one of my greatest pride things, that other people care now. Yay. But we partnered with what you're talking about, Jeff. I think all the Stream Explorers volunteers came and volunteered for the ecology field trips. And these Stream Explorers is a youth education program, or at least was the name of it when 10 years ago when I was doing this. And then we all agreed to volunteer for Trout Unlimited when they had field trips and events. And that is how the network all grew. And it's just Salida. There's only 5,000 people there. It's not a lot of people. And it build community, and it's a beautiful thing. And so that's what we're trying to do down here in the Springs too, but bigger community, but still the same heart behind it. And I'll stop talking now, but I loved your talks about your bios. That was inspiring. And Dylan's here, and I wanted to give him the opportunity to introduce himself, because Dylan is the person who initiated this conversation. So thank you for that.
Hello, can you guys see me?
Yeah,
All
we
right,
can see you.
hello, sorry, yeah, and so with that being said, of course, I was the guy who was 30 minutes late, so I apologize about that. But I had an appointment this morning, so I'm really glad to see you guys though, and thanks for coming out to do this. Anytime I see you, I'm stoked. So yeah, so a little bit about me, I guess, is I'm actually working at Project Healing Waters right now, fly fishing the 501c. So I'm the lead for education and training. So that's kind of where I fit in right now. And we just opened up an office. So we're with COVID, I'm sure TU felt it as well, but we were pretty much non-operational. So a lot of stuff coming up this next year. And being the education and training lead, my big thing is I want to input the conservational aspect into your like typical 101 class. So like we have, if those of you who do fly fish, if you've been out like to Deckers this year, you'll see just the influx of new fly fishermen on any river system or any water system. There's a lot more pressure. So I think it's, one of the things was interesting for me and why I asked Dr. Gaddis was, like about the conservational effort is how can we, plug that in to new fly fishermen and get it going. So we have a new breed of fly fishermen who have conservation built into their pocketbook, so that's kind of my goal and the direction I want to head into. But anything trout, I love to talk about. So again, yeah, that's just a little background about me.
Thanks, Dylan.
Of course.
Yeah, thanks, Dylan. I agree. I think that conservation ethic is really important as we see more and more people get into fishing or even just other forms of recreation out on our public lands. It's vital to securing and protecting our resources for the future. So I'm really glad to hear that you're part of Project Healing Waters. It's such a great organization, and hopefully we can find some opportunities to work with you in the future to bring TU and conservation even more into the fold there.
Yeah, and that's that would be ideal. So like for instance, every month we have a speaker that we try to slot for Project Healing Waters. And that it covers anything. So it can be fly tying, fly casting, conservation. Now what I feel like is missing from a lot of fly programs, and this is just from talking to the guys that you go up to Arc Anglers up in Salida or Anglers Covey here or any fly shop, you talk about the influx of new fly fishermen and there's a lot of these 101 classes, but there's a huge conservational piece missing. And so that causes a lot of frustration too on the water because you have a lot of, I picked up more fishing line this year than I ever have. I picked up more trash, but like bobbers, everything. So, and then also just there's the conservation aspect as far as fish handling. That's a huge thing as far as trout and salmonoid species. They're very sensitive, like the use of tailing gloves, things like that. So there's just a lot of stuff that I feel like with the sport kind of exploding and also conservation, I think especially really becoming more popular and acceptable, that it's just like the perfect time to combine those two. So I would love to I'll get your guys' information, but I would love to have you guys, if you'd be willing to come down to the office and speak at one of our monthly classes. So.
Absolutely, that'd be great.
Awesome.
I do have a question, and we can also use the chat, folks, if you want to pose questions. I'm trying to monitor the chat. So last semester we were in Bear Creek, and I took the students there on a field trip, and this was for resource management and conservation, and I put it in the chat. But we had this question because we got there and we were at the bottom lock, and I just happened to mention like, oh, this is weird. There's all this sediment in here, this is usually clear. And then we walked up and there was a restoration going on where they were like recontouring the whole stream. And there was this like sooty looking, very thin sediment all in the water column. And I just wondered, like, what is it about fish? How could they survive that restoration occurrence? And that would have been like in October. And it was probably like that organic matter layer. It was at the top of the soil, and we were like, how are they not killing the fish by doing the restoration? Question mark.
Yeah.
Any ideas?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that Bear Creek area has, really seen a lot of significant recreation impacts with the trail system and road system up there. So a big part of that initiative was to, like you said, kind of recontour the road, recontour the trail system in there to prevent some of the significant erosion that's coming into that stream year after year. And it's a really bad situation for those greenbacks in there because there's so much fine sediment that's getting in there and really filling in a lot of the spawning habitat. And it's also choking out the macroinvertebrates and everything that the fish rely on in terms of the food web. And so there has been an effort with a lot of different partners there to kind of rework that trail and road system and help reduce the erosion that we're seeing year after year. And I, the project I think you saw, there was definitely some disturbance in that stream section. I think the hope, of the fishery biologists there and the Forest Service and others was that initial influx of sediment that was caused by the restoration work would kind of quickly move through the system so that, the fish, they are used to certain influxes of sediment. It's just a natural part of seasonal flows. So they can respond. If it's constant over a long period of time, that's when you start to see the impacts where dissolved oxygen and other breathing problems start to take place. But the way they kind of structured that restoration project was that they were in the stream as little as they needed to be. And they also spread it out over a longer period of time. So they do a little bit of work and then let the sediment flush through. And then they do a little bit of work and let that sediment flush through. And they actually had a full-time biologist on site the whole time, making sure they were doing a bunch of monitoring, making sure that those sediment thresholds weren't met essentially or exceeded. And so that, the long-term goal, while they did have to get in the stream and they did put sediment into the system, the long-term goal is that by doing this work, they're going to reduce the overall amount of sediment and fine particles that are entering the system to protect fish for a longer period of time. So that is a really good question.
Well, and maybe you guys have recreated there, and the other thought was maybe the eggs were already laid or up farther in the stream, because if you've been to High Drive, like a half a mile up or so, you have Forest Road 666 and the drainage follows up that way. But if you kind of think about how, like, especially like if you're from, I don't know, the Midwest or something, there's like the Pikes Peak Granite, I would assume it makes pretty good spawning habitat because it's like so granular and it's a large particle size. Whereas it does cause a great deal of erosion, right? And then sometimes there's that sand. So overall, is Pikes Peak Granite like good or bad for fisheries?
That's a good question. I think it's all about diversity in the system. So there will be areas where that Pikes Peak granite probably provides some good habitat for different life stages, like spawning. If there's too much of it or too much, fine sediment, then you start to see issues with fish or macroinvertebrates not being able to complete their life cycles or find that in-stream habitat. So that's kind of where like promoting system diversity and promoting complex habitat and nutrient inputs and those kinds of things is really important, because these systems will self-regulate if we kind of get out of their way a little bit. And so it's hard to say whether it's a good thing or bad thing, but I would just say complexity is really important.
Yeah, and so for a couple of years, I just have wanted to talk to students about how like the Fountain Creek watershed is steep and fast, right? It's pristine and then immediately disgusting. Like we did a seminar last fall or the fall before where we followed Bear Creek from High Drive, and then we went to the nature center and we looked at the deciduous riparian forest, but then we were in the dog park, and then we were behind Walmart, and then we were at the confluence of the Fountain Creek and Monument Creeks, and it's like the most disgusting thing I've ever seen at a river confluence. And it is, I would argue less than 10 miles from the headwaters, which is right there where 666 reaches the ridge, right? And that's something we don't think about in this community, is like we're proximate, we're a city proximate to the wilderness, and that is a concern. And I used to live in Missoula. I was in the wilderness and civilization program, and the closest wilderness area to a city boundary right there, and the Rattlesnake Wilderness. And so when we think about where do we live geographically, that's where we live, in the headwaters, but high impact, few miles downstream. Jesse asked, I'm wondering why biologists believe greenback cutthroat were extinct before 2012. Were their genetics hybridized, or why hadn't they discovered that species in that location before then?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is it's kind of a in-depth, complicated story of the greenback, but essentially they used to be native to the South Platte Basin, so technically not in Bear Creek. And, through different human impacts and hybridization, by the 1970s, it was believed that the greenback was extinct. They couldn't find any of those populations. And so then I think late 70s, they found a population of cutthroat trout that they thought were the greenback cutthroat. And they started stocking those into reservoirs and rivers all over the South Platte drainage. And up until 2012, they just didn't have the technical science to look at the genetics of these fish. And so what ended up happening was that back in the 1800s, there was a business owner there at the base of Pikes Peak and Bear Creek that wanted a private kind of fishery ranch, so that tourists and climbers and people exploring up Pikes Peak could stop there and fish and stay at his cabins. And so he actually, back in the day, transported a bunch of actual true greenbacks into those ponds. And so that kind of created a habitat refuge for the greenback as they were going extinct in their native headwaters. And what eventually happened was that in 2012, there was a scientific study done by researchers at the University of Colorado that looked at museum specimens that were sent back to museums in the East Coast and back to Britain. And though they were able to actually take the DNA from those fish and compare it to what they thought were the greenbacks, and they realized that actually the genetics were off. and that they were actually, it was actually a hybrid version. It was a mix of Colorado River cutthroat and Yellowstone cutthroat that they thought were the greenbacks. And so then they sampled the fish in Bear Creek because the biologists, fisheries biologists were like, wow, this is kind of a different looking species. And they found that those genetics actually match the museum specimens from the 1800s. And so they were able to isolate this population in Bear Creek. And they realized that this was the last remaining true population of greenback cutthroat, right there in a few miles of Bear Creek and a couple ponds. And so from that point, the state and a lot of other organizations like TU have been spawning those fish and putting them into the hatchery system, and then now trying to put them back on the landscape. Does that answer your question, Jesse?
Yes, thank you so much. That was really great. That's really, really interesting.
It is.
I guess I have another question about the greenbacks. As far as with the whole COVID and everything, as far as your trip, you know, like you guys, where you guys pack them in, like Dry Gulch, are you guys doing, like, what does your plan look like this year for those kind of restoration efforts for the greenback?
Yeah, so that's a good question. We're hoping to have more stocking projects like that. So for folks on the call, as Dylan mentioned, you know, Dry Creek and Herman Gulch up I-70, those are two sites where we've been stocking the true native greenback into their new habitats. We're working on a couple of other sites with CPW right now. You know, it's a lot of these sites are kind of tough because they, you know, it's a long process. Like, you have to identify an area that's conducive, has good habitat, has the right thermal regime, has good supply for bugs and everything that we know these fish can survive. And then you have to remove the non-native fish like brook trout and others that will outcompete the greenbacks. And then you have to build a barrier downstream so that these non-native fish don't migrate back upstream. And so it takes several years at a lot of these sites before you can even think about stocking fish. Now, sometimes there will be a great natural feature like a waterfall or something, and you can go in and sometimes it'll even be fishless. And so that kind of expedites the process a little bit. Herman and Dry Gulch we stocked those for 3 years. So now CPW is monitoring to see if there's natural recruitment. So we probably won't stock in there, but there will be hopefully some opportunities the next year or two to backpack in some fish. And if you haven't done it, it's a lot of fun. You know, you pretty much get a big goldfish bag like you do from the pet store and put it in your backpack, and there's an endangered species on your back, and you hike them in, you know, 3 to 6 to 10 miles, and release them and name them as as they spill out of the bag. And it's an amazing experience. Definitely hoping to have more of that this year.
And I remember that thing like fills up fast. Like the registration, it's usually full, like just like any other like big sporting event. You usually got to get on that one real quick.
Yeah, and we can send, when we do have an opportunity, we can send that, you know, maybe to you, Maggie, and you can send it to your group. And if you're interested as well, you can go onto the Colorado TU webpage where it says volunteer, and you can sign up to get alerts for those kinds of volunteer opportunities.